Welcome to Around the Blockchain. Don't forget to like and subscribe. To today's episode of Around the Blockchain. Before we get started, if you could do me a massive favor, I want you to take the subscribe button out to dinner to a really, really expensive restaurant. And I want you to also order the most expensive alcohol that's on the menu. And before it comes time to pay, I want you to pretend to go to the bathroom and then actually dip out of the restaurant. Also, if you can, click the bell notification so you don't miss any of my uploads. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. All right, beautiful. Marcus, welcome to Around the Blockchain. If you can just introduce yourself to the viewers for me, please.
Yeah, hi Ryan. Well, it's Marcus Xavier, and I've been in this blockchain space, I guess, for, since about 2016, 2017, maybe a bit earlier than that, but in the emerging tech, since the late 80s. So this is my second time around into the emerging technologies. But I'm based in Vanuatu, actually, of all places, and which makes it very interesting. As somebody once said to me, Marcus, you got to eat your own dog food, and I said, well, what does that really mean? And by eating your own dog food, she says, well, you can live on an island, you live off tech, the comms are really good, you just got to think about the timelines, and that's it, and that's what I do. So, I've got a satellite dish here, and away I go.
How did you get started in the emerging tech space? You've been around, like you were saying, since the late 80s. So how did you sort of get involved? And then I wouldn't mind chatting to you a little bit about the dot-com era as well.
Yeah, look, the dot-com era was a really interesting era. There's a lot of people sort of who've been through that, I think, who kind of look at what's happening now with this blockchain revolution. And I won't say the crypto revolution, but certainly the blockchain revolution. And there's a lot of synergy in between those, So, but yeah, look, I came into that, interestingly enough, it would be in the late 80s, and my area of specialty or area of focus in that was B2B or enterprise grade e-commerce, and I kind of saw, well, hey, this has got to be good, because I know I was working in the liquor industry as well, and running a lot of outlets, I suppose you could probably call them, hotels and pubs and liquor retail outlets, and one large liquor group as well. And so I knew that industry pretty well, but I knew all the shortcomings and the problems that it had, and particularly as a supply chain. So focus then went into e-commerce, and it was a very interesting time. And look, I just got to recount a really funny story. We designed our first e-commerce platform. And actually we're out and had it up and running and had it working as such. And I remember I was in South Australia, and I thought I'd give it some sort of indication of who I was talking to. But I walked down the boardroom, and because I was a buyer as well at the time, and said to the guys, they welcomed me in, and as they do, and I guess because I was working at a national level, they gave me the courtesy of inviting me into the boardroom to have my pitch. So I did. Anyway, and of course everybody was looking and said, yeah, and, I think they're being quite courteous. And they said, well, we've had a lot of people, because this is right at the beginning of that sort of dot-com, internet, online purchasing and so forth. And, and they said, look, we've had a lot of people come in and tell us all about this. And I said, oh, yeah, look, I'm sure you have. I said, would you like to see it? And of course, then there was a deafening silence in the boardroom, because everyone was talking about it. But my company, we'd actually built one, and knowing how that supply chain worked and all the dramas that it had, we took them through it, and we set up some accounts and all for them. We said, would you like to order some of your own product? And of course that was the start of it. And then from there, we went right throughout that industry, and it was a fascinating time. But the dot-com era, you mentioned there before, it was a pretty interesting time. We were moving into, I know I'm working a lot in education in this space now, the blockchain space, but I refer a lot to that time, particularly in the early stages, because I remember there was a time, once we'd actually had our e-commerce platform up and running, and we had some pretty significant companies on, and I don't mind telling you, sort of we're pushing through maybe 40 to 60 million Australian dollars a month actually through our platform, so it was really cranking away. But I remember the Minister for ICT at the time, had come back from he'd come back from Silicon Valley, and he said, Marcus, this thing that you're building and that you've got out there, he said, well, look, we don't know. I don't really know how well this is going to go for you. I said, I don't want to be really the bearer of bad news, but I've got to tell you, the buzzword around Silicon Valley was disintermediation, and I said, well, you're going to have to spell that for me, Mike, because I don't even know what that means. And anyway, so he told me, what's going on. And of course, the whole idea of disintermediation is to, codify or automate, sort of intermediaries. And when you think of supply chains, there's a lot of intermediaries in supply chains, and, they can be really complex, and more often than not, they really are. And there are a lot of issues, with it within supply chains. Anyway, so I put the phone down and spoke to my tech team. I had one on the Northern Hemisphere and one on the Southern Hemisphere, and I said, listen, guys, I've just got this news. It's a little bit worrying, about this stuff called disintermediation. We really need to work out, can the technologies at the time, because this is late 80s, early 90s, can the technology actually do that? Because I had my doubts. Anyway, so we figured it couldn't. And as it turned out, it couldn't. But what really stuck with me was this whole notion of disintermediation. And we thought about it a lot. We thought, man, if we could actually make this happen, this is a fair income game changer. And this will turn supply chains, this will turn many things in e-commerce, on its ear. And of course, then along came blockchain, which, after Satoshi's paper, was really, it was all about, codifying intermediaries and, stopping double spending, yada, yada, yada. And so we knew that, and that which was the entree for me into the blockchain space. But the dot-com era was very interesting. A lot of pushback, like emerging tech everywhere. A lot of people, everyone who wants to tell you what it can't do and, and what it won't do. But they tend to look through everything through the lens of what's happening then. And the systems that they've been using and used to using over the last however many decades, and this is always the trouble, with emerging tech, because you really need to be a bit of a futurist. Pull the crystal ball out and say, well, listen, this is where I think it might go. Hey, this is what the technology can do. This is maybe what we can do with it. Which is all about creating value and giving people a reason to use it. So, but look, it's no different. We're experiencing this now with blockchain. Same thing. Same sort of pushback, and they see everything through the eyes of how existing systems work. Through data. The transparency of data. They see it, and the centralisation of databases and centralisation of systems. They still see everything through that perspective, which of course that's the revolution. It's not like that at all. So that was that was the entree. Yeah, that was the entree into it, right?
I was going to ask you, a lot of people do make that comparison between what we're sort of experiencing now through the crypto and blockchain sort of space back to that dot-com era. Do you think that comparison itself is warranted? And do you think that we're sort of experiencing those same sort of hiccups we did through that dot-com era?
Yeah, I wouldn't call them hiccups. I call them lessons. I think there was an awful lot to learn about, that dot-com era, where you learned how, the market, how people, how industry, would view emerging technologies. It's like, with online payments, we buy something now and the next thing that comes out of your mouth is, well, can I pay for that online? But in reality, when the technology was robust with the banks and the pipes were really good, it took nearly 9 years to get really any sort of mainstream. That's 9 years, so it's really got nothing to do with the technology, and all to do with user acceptance. But yeah, look, I think there are a lot of lessons and there's a lot of similarity, and I think some of those lessons all around about standards, not operating standards, but standards, in the code, standards in regulation, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot there to be learned. And I think, my experience so far is people are actually learning those lessons. And, so now when we look at the platforms that are emerging, there's a lot of work in there. And I think the nice thing is a lot of it now is, is open source. So there's a lot of work being done so that they can interoperate and talk with each other. And that's really critical for emerging tech, particularly when we're looking, at things like blockchain, which is really touching everything on the planet at the moment, and there's a lot going on. People don't even see it happening, it is happening, and things are moving on to, onto blockchain. So I think there's a lot of lessons, but you still get the same, the same type of thinking from people. That was, oh no, look, this is the way that it works now. But you know what? They were saying that about that technology when it launched and when it emerged as well. So it's kind of like, hey, are you listening to yourself here? And but yeah, very, very, very similar. But the timeline in terms of overcoming these is definitely, I'm saying, is, if it was 9 years, it might be 2 years now. So it is significantly shorter. So hanging by the seat of your pants now. So I think us old dotcomers, are looking at this going, wow, this is like the dot-com era on steroids. This is really cool. We're not going to have to go through all the financial pain that we went through in that era.
Touch wood, touch wood.
Yeah, touch wood, correct, yes.
It's interesting. So you look back in like human history, and anytime you do see some form of emerging technology coming through, so you could even go back as as far as say when the horse and cart obviously were the main modes of transport, and then cars came along. There was also a bit of a backlash and not so much backlash, I should say, probably more so like a transition period for people accepting that, okay, the horse and cart is now kind of getting pushed to the side, and it's going to be part of the past, and we're moving into the future, and cars are going to be part of the future. And the same sort of lessons seem to constantly repeat themselves throughout history. Obviously that's just one example.
Yeah, look, I think the one that always sticks with me, if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, particularly, when the periods when the term Luddites was actually born, and when they were talking about in the UK, when they were making fabric and in that sort of mercantile area, and it was the same cries. Hey, there'll be no jobs. You're going to kill industry. Machines are going to take over, and so forth. And they're very serious about it in those days. I mean, I think the girl that they put up the front of it, sadly, they actually even hung her. Which is dreadful. But it just goes to show the depth of of people's passion. But I like to refer to that one because it really brought into play, the everyday people. When I say the everyday people, I'm talking about the public and the consumers. And people were concerned about jobs. They were concerned about, are you going to kill an industry? Hey, none of us are going to have any work. Well, we know what history tells us, and this is why I think it's healthy when people do actually refer back to these prior revolutions. And, so I think people really learnt that, well, hey, no, we didn't. We know historically that industry absolutely boomed. It was a boom time for Great Britain and, around the world. So I think people kind of learn these things. They don't, they don't really, they don't have the dreadful effects. Even if we come into, and I put that, because I know in the education space now, we talk a lot about actually, limitations, but also some of the disadvantages of coming into emerging tech. And one of those things is job losses. It's a fact. There will be job losses. But, they transition, and they said the same thing, with the internet and the World Wide Web. Oh, look, there's going to be job losses. They said the same thing, when they actually had the mechanised loom. Oh, there's going to be job losses and the world's going to stop. Well, you know what? The world actually boomed and it didn't stop. It kept on going, So it was really quite different. And it's the same. I think, if I recall what I was reading probably last year, we're in Australia, for example, they're predicting, probably in the next 5 years anyway, they'll probably be in this space. When I say this space, in the tech space, emerging techs, and emerging tech, I'm talking specifically blockchain. They're, quoting things like 1.8 million jobs, new jobs, but they're quoting things like 1.7 million old jobs are going to disappear, and this is very true. And, because things are going to be done differently. And blockchain does that, allows things to be done differently. We have new ways of doing things, as we call it, different flows of execution. We have new business models. Things change, and businesses will be disrupted. It's like when Amazon disrupted retailing, and when Uber disrupted taxis, when Airbnb disrupted accommodation. Now those companies, which are absolute giant killers, or call them category killers, whatever you'd like, those sort of companies in recent times have been disrupted by smaller, more innovative, saying, hey, we have this new technology called blockchain. And, we can do this differently. We can just connect the counterparties and we don't need these people in between, So they've, of course, very promptly, looked at, well, how do we engage with this? And, and all sorts of other problems that they solve. So it's an interesting time. So, yeah, a lot of same kind of pushback. It's kind of like, same thing. And but what does that tell you? It tells us that we've got to, as quickly as we can, we've got to understand, what is this emerging tech? What does it really do? And, and why is it revolutionary? And so once you understand that, then you start shaking off, the lenses that you look through when you I'm going to look at it through a centralized database, because it's not a centralized database. It doesn't get handled that way. Is the trustworthy? Why is it that we use blockchain for provenance? Because we have this chronological chain of custody that we can prove it's immutable. You can't change it. And Australians love, farm to fork, paddock to plate. And I said, well, how does that happen? How do you prove that? So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, very. Look, you've touched on a few things there. I wanted to just move into what you're obviously doing now. So you're an educator as well as you run a couple of other businesses, but predominantly an educator. If someone walks through the door, or maybe not so much walks through the door, but take that as a just as a way to describe things. But day one, walks through the door, asks you what blockchain technology is and what it does. How would you explain
Yeah.
that to somebody?
Well, I'd probably say, listen, I think we probably need to go to the pub. The it's not an easy question. Look, there's two ways of looking at it. You can give them the technical response, which takes you 2 minutes. It's decentralized database and it's immutable, data and yada yada, and that can happen. But what does that actually mean? And I think the thing, you start this conversation, be quite honest, is trying to identify what space you work in, what sort of field you work in. Because what I do know is blockchain works in pretty much every single vertical on the planet. It works in everything. It's not product in a box, which people tend to think, oh, it's product in a box, but it's not. And it works through and it does so many different things. So it's all about creating value. So it's a difficult question to answer. As you can imagine, I've been researching. I live, eat, and breathe blockchain. I have been doing, probably 6-7 days a week for 7 years, and and I've seen many attempts at people trying to describe what blockchain is. But I think it's understanding, well, how does it affect the industries that they're in. My only response, quite honestly, is I really like to understand, well, what industry do you work in, and because it's all about solving problems. Emerging tech has always been about solving problems. You solve problems, you create value. You create value, and then they will use it. People will use it. So it's really, I think a lot of the things we tend to talk about is when people ask that question, we can give them the technical response. What is blockchain? And look, and you can Google that, and you can find that in 5 minutes, and you'll find 30 or 40 different responses to what it is. I'm not sure whether your listeners really need me to add another one to it, but it's really, I'd really encourage people to look in your industry and look how you can use these immutable ledgers. Can you imagine, in your industry where you have trusted third parties, typically intermediaries? What if you didn't actually need to have them? What if you could codify them? What if you had workflows and you could actually codify that? How would that change? Look, I'll give you a little example, and I love this one, and I suppose probably coming from the liquor industry years ago, when we talk about Budweiser beer, and Bud's always used to tout, hey, their claim to fame is, our beer is never above, 40 degrees Fahrenheit, I think it is. And, it's never, and kind of people say, well, how do you do that? Because it goes into the, it goes into the storerooms, into the warehouses, it goes on the trucks, then it goes to distribution points and it gets out to wherever. Well, here's the thing. with blockchain, what we can do, we merge that up with the Internet of Things, with sensors. So we could have, imagine if within where they're stacking it all up, all the pallets of beer, and you've got sensors in there which are saying, yes, it's 40 degrees here, or it's below 40 degrees. And that goes up, and it goes up to the, through the GPS and or through the satellite, and of course that then connects to the blockchain, and it says, yes, this is where it is, and this is the temperatures. So then it gets put on the truck. And, so if it's going on the truck now, all of a sudden, the truck, for whatever reason, he stops on the side of the road to do whatever, as truckies do, goes and gets something to eat, forgets to leave the refrigeration on, and this beer starts soaring up. It's gone up to 50 degrees, 60 degrees, 70 degrees. It's heating up. So the sensors are saying, it's sending up to the blockchain. It's going, hey, guess what? This beer for the last hour, has been at 60 degrees. And so the blockchain then has these things called smart contracts, and the smart contracts say, wow, this is, so this is going at 60 degrees. Now, that's a catalyst for me to kick off a new, what we would call flow of execution. It's going to say, now, I need to turn that truck around. It turns the truck around, provides the advice to the driver, turn the truck around. It sends the advice then to the people that were waiting for the delivery to say, hey, listen, your delivery, we haven't been able to meet our QA. So we've actually turned it around. And then the smart contract also then goes, advises the credit department, said, issue a credit note. And then it says reissue a new order. And so then it reorders and so forth. So what it's done, it's automated some new workflows as well. And these are multiple workflows. And this is a simple example. So everybody knows what's going on. The beer goes back, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this all happens very, very quickly. Very, very quick. And nobody can tamper with that. So nobody could say, so the driver couldn't say, oh, no, it was at 40 degrees and blah, blah, blah. So it's tamper-proof. The data is immutable. That means it can't be altered. The actual system is driven by a smart contract, which says, or the application is driven by a smart contract, which says, it's been a catalyst, an event has occurred, this is what we do. It's initiated all the various people, rather than, tomorrow, Mary Jane in the accounts department, reissues all the papers and on it goes. This happens very, very quickly, and it's automated. Saves time, saves money, creates efficiencies, does what it needs to do. So it's a good example to sort of say, well, then people say, so the blockchain can do that. Said, yes, this is what it does. It creates this environment which allows this to occur, and it allows it to occur autonomously. Now, by autonomously, I mean we don't have to have people involved in between. So there's nobody to change it, nobody to censor it, nobody to change things. It will occur. So I think it's sort of, my responses usually when people ask me there on, well, what is blockchain? I like to sort of say, well, listen, imagine this. But we have, any number of these types of scenarios from pretty much every industry, because we've been working in pretty much every industry.
That's a great example, Marcus. I haven't heard as clear an example as that in my past at all. So the one you've just given has been fantastic. I think that's probably going to resonate with a lot of people as well, because it just is quite simple to understand. Obviously, you're an educator, right? So you lecture and you do run the Uber Academy. Have you
Correct, yeah.
seen any particular industries where students are predominantly coming from to study, obviously, any of the courses you offer?
Look, that's a pretty interesting question, because I look carefully at this. So look, to start off with the first statement, the educator definitely, and I've actually written the first 3 actual registered qualifications or accredited qualifications in blockchain. They sit on the Australian qualifications framework. I'm currently also writing a bachelor, which will hopefully be out. That'll be a Bachelor of Applied Blockchain, and that'll be out in probably, I think we hope, mid 23. So, and that sort of then we're rolling on a master's from there. But we've also got a string of short specialised courses and so forth in there. But everything's blockchain. All we deal is in blockchain, and how do we apply blockchain? They're not technical space. So the space that I work in, we call it, I actually have termed a coined phrase, actually applied blockchain, because it's how do you apply blockchain? And so I work in that space, and and this is all we do. Now, next question on there in terms of what sort of people. Now, I've got to be honest, there is absolutely no particular industry that they come from. We've got them from all industries, finance, health, supply chain. What I will say though, we've got a lot of people who are probably more interested in, they understand their particular industry they're in. As I always say, you've got to be the king or queen of your domain to really understand how these, how you can actually create value by applying blockchain. But we've got a lot of people actually looking for career changes. They see, hey, this is a real revolution. They're probably switched on to, well, what happened when the World Wide Web and the internet, how that changed the world. And they're seeing now, they've done enough research now or seen enough to say, hey, this is really changing. My view on that is if you want to change the way the world works, change the way you move money. And, so and we've certainly been doing that, with tokens and the token economy and cryptocurrencies, and now, with central banks moving to CBDCs, etc. So we got a lot of people from a whole bunch of different, I will say there's no one particular. What we are finding now, because I have programs on through the Uber Academy where I teach teachers in this, for various colleges. And so I'm starting to see evidence now of colleges, taking areas of specialisation, like supply chain, for example. Hey, we're already working in the supply chain area. They want to teach in, so they register people there, and then they're bringing in people and they're teaching them, how does blockchain apply in supply chain. So I think, but in terms of, their interest, no, they really are coming, coming from everywhere. We have a combination of people who have exposure, through crypto. And hey, I've been working in cryptocurrency, or I've been investing in cryptocurrency, and I'm now understanding that sort of blockchain is the underpinning technology that sits behind, the exchanges, and also, the creation of the tokens, etc. And so they're thinking, wow, it does a lot of stuff. I think I want to learn more about that, So we're seeing that for sure. So they come from everywhere, which is kind of really nice, So when you have a group of people, you have quite a lot to talk about, and you have a lot of views and a lot of thoughts about how you can apply it and how you can use it. So everybody learns. It's a real win-win. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you also mentioned that you have written the course content for a bunch of different courses that are all recognised here in Australia. How did you come up with the criteria for that? Obviously, blockchain is an emerging technology. How did you, I guess, maybe compartmentalize each sort of specific part of blockchain technology and then come up with a framework for, obviously, to educate people through? How did you sort of do that? What was that process like?
Look, I think it's a great question, right? Because it's, I suppose some of it's my secret sauce, but but look, it is a great question because, there's a reason why it's been very, very difficult to get these types of courses accredited around the world. It's been, in some jurisdictions like the US, for example, it's extremely difficult, and I won't say that, having them accredited in Australia was easy, because it wasn't, but I think, I had the benefit of coming through that dotcom era. And so I had the benefit of actually understanding, when you're looking at emerging technologies, what does it take to get emerging tech up and running? And this is why the courses are all about applied blockchain. It's all about how do you apply it. It's all about strategy. It's not, how do you write code, because there's a lot of that. You can get that anywhere. And you know what? It changes. It changes weekly. But we also learned through that dotcom era that, the tech guys, that dropped off reasonably quickly. Then the focus then became very much on, hey, we have this new technology. What do we do with it? And how do we actually make it work for us? And if we're going to change the way that we do business, how are we going to use it to do that? So I had the benefit of, I guess, of working for years, as a strategic consultant as well, but also too, with my own companies. And, so I had a real understanding of what does it really take, to take emerging technologies and then get it to a point where, hey, I can actually do something with it, and we understand it. So there's combinations of things in there, which sort of deal with. I mean, there's planning, there's the elements of project planning, no question, because you need to understand those and how that fits in. You need to understand the language of blockchain, because like all emerging tech, it has its own language. We talk about various, things, and as I always say, you've got to be really careful what you ask for, because you'll probably get it. And if it wasn't what you're expecting, that's what you're going to get. So I think there's a combination of coming through, having, and it's one of the advantages, I guess, of probably being a bit older, and also, being in that sort of business space at all sorts of levels. So there's a combination of what does business need, how do you transition, being through the transition, understanding what the pushback and the limitations will be, and typically are, combinations of that. And then, of course, then it's a lot of solid research. I guess I was fortunate because, I had a successful tech company, so we sort of, I got what was required and those sorts of things. So it's a bit of a perfect storm in that, so this is a bit of the secret sauce, I guess, a bit of a perfect storm in as much as, you really need to go through that to understand how it all comes together. And, so I was supported very well, through industry and through the peak bodies in Australia. I was also, when I pushed it through, we had PwC was what they call the SSO, Skill Service Organisation. They're basically the gatekeeper for, for managing ICT and business quals. And, they really loved it. And, so a lot of interviews, a lot of talking to people actually in the space, but also to weeding out, and you can only do this through experience, I have to say, sorry. You can research as much as you like, but, in the end of the day, you read a lot of stuff and you just say, that's just rubbish, or that is, this is no slight on academia, but you will say, it's just so academic and it's just never going to happen like that, so the courses are really founded in, in reality and what it will take to, come up with an idea and take it all the way to you've got it to a point where you've got specifications ready, for your tech teams. And then beyond that, how do you then start, measuring the performance, of this new business model that you've actually just created. So, but also too, involved in some of the courses, some of the world's best practice tools that we use, things like business model canvas and so forth. How do we actually build a good business model? So yeah, a lot of research, and of course, a lot of talking to people, a lot of interviews, and relying on a lot of actual real experience, having come through that dotcom. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, so you've got a couple of different courses, from like a pretty short sort of introductory blockchain course all the way through to roughly it's an 18-month TAFE sort of level course. And now you're also writing... Sorry, you're also writing the course content for an actual bachelor's degree as well.
Yeah, well, I started off with the advanced diploma. I worked into the vocational sector first, and because the decision was really quite conscious whether I go into higher ed or the vocational sector. And I went into the vocational sector, particularly at the level 6, which is an advanced diploma, because that deals with strategy, and it really deals with strategic thinking and planning that way, which is really what you need. Which was kind of counterintuitive to how in the vocational sector they work. They tend to work. You start with a certificate, then you do a diploma, then you do an advanced diploma, and then you go on from there. Then you move into a level 7, which is a bachelor or an undergrad. But it doesn't actually, in the real world, it doesn't work that way. Particularly when you've got emerging tech, you actually got to have, somebody's got to create the business model first. Somebody's got to create these things first. Otherwise there's no other jobs because it's got to exist and it's got to work. So I started there. And the reason I picked the actually vocational sector, notwithstanding that, sort of experience in both, but also I knew that sector extremely well as well. And It was, the logical point of entry. So that way, people actually learn a lot of technical skills. So there's a lot of it's quite pragmatic, and, because vocational education, by and large, is really focused on job outcomes. And so at that point, I'd actually drafted up two potential jobs, for the Australian government, what they would see as would come on a skills shortage, particularly in this space. And so they're in play now. But so I guess it was really starting at that level, so people could understand the fundamentals and the foundations of blockchain, and then work through, well, how do we work this up, and how do we take an idea, or how do we analyse, business the way that it works now, and which is very interesting, because we're telling people, showing them, well, this is how you should be looking at. I guess is the old consultant in me coming out, but it's how you should be looking at these centralised through those old lenses, and so that way you start identifying, what it does and what it doesn't do. And so now, let's have a look at our value drivers, for blockchain, and if we applied those, how would that change that? How would we be creating value then? What pains are we relieving? What gains are we creating? And so it's very pragmatic, and that's why we went into, I started there, then moving into, then there's a diploma as well, and the diploma level, they call that a level 5, and that typically deals with implementing. So that then started, I then started identifying how do you, then start bringing blockchain into particularly these new disruptive business models, into teams working with that, and how do you apply these things, and how do you plan for things. I mean, we talked about disintermediation right at the get-go today, but just think about that for a moment. We've got long-standing relationships, long-standing processes that we've had in place. We've had this trust layer that we've been working with, and we've told us how, and we've been doing this for 3 decades, maybe 4 decades. We actually have to have these people that will broker the trust. Now, what we're turning around and saying, no, we'll codify them. And we don't actually have to have them there in between, so it strikes fear into people. So we learn about how you have to plan for that, because these are real things in an organisation, which turns organisations upside down. So so we deal a lot with that in the level 5, and then I wrote a second diploma, which then starts introducing where machine learning and AI fit into into this. Because blockchain, as we know, creates this immutable data. So we've got data that we can trust, and this is one of the big pushbacks for most of the larger organisations around the world who are moving into AI. So yeah, well, can we really trust it? They're going because they know where the value is and where the benefits are, but they will still, have other models that they'll run in parallel just to make sure that it's probably doing what it's supposed to do. And it tells you we don't trust the data. So why not get the data from a source that we can trust? Makes sense to me, and this is one of the things, and I guess this is one of those pushbacks where people say, well, we have all this big data floating around the world at the moment, we'll just use that. And I said, well, good luck. If you ask me, can I trust it? Maybe I can, maybe I can't. Is it full of bias? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Is it a formula I can use? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Why not generate it? So, of course, this is where, where a lot of work's been done in the blockchain space at the moment. As they say, data is the new oil.
It's a great saying.
So, it's a great saying, and it is very, very true. And it's what it can actually do for you. It's not so much the cost of it, but it's what it can actually do. So we really need to take it seriously. And we talked earlier about some of the low-hanging fruit for blockchain being provenance. Well, we're talking here the provenance of data. It's data provenance. If data is new oil, we want to know that this is data we can trust. Now that tells me this is good oil.
Yeah, absolutely. Data provenance would be probably an interesting topic to discuss as well. Obviously, we've got massive companies like Facebook, who's obviously recently changed the name of their company to Meta. They've been in the data space for a long time now, for 10 or so plus years, and obviously they on-sell consumer data to these different companies, who then obviously implement that and figure out different ways to market to them, and so on and so forth. Do you obviously foresee blockchain disrupting that particular
it already is.
sector?
Yeah, like it already is. I mean, you only have to go into Europe, for example, at the moment where they got the GDP. I always get this one, it's an acronym, but it's in the, they have legislation around data and where you can use it. If you collect it, what do how far can you actually, take the use of it and sell it, which basically you can't. And, so it makes it very, very difficult. And this is becoming more and more topical, when you sit in on any forums around the world, particularly where blockchain's related, this comes up, quite often because we know that, blockchain, we can protect the data. We're essentially, as it came out of Satoshi's paper, it was all about democratization. What we're doing is we're trying to hand back to people, the ability for them to, it's their data, it's their information, so instead of companies, as you say, which have done, and they just mine all that data and they sell it, they make a lot of money out of it. And but more so, like Facebook, they use it, and similarly with Amazon and others, they use the data. But when you've got other companies, say like, for example, big retailers like Walmart, they want to use their transactional data so they can understand their clients, understand what people want. But the thing is it's our data, it's our information, and I think as human beings, we get particularly prickly when people want to take information about us. And this is one of the things about blockchain, I guess, is we have the ability to be anonymous. So you can have these, what we call pseudonymous sort of transactions going on where we're just a line of code, we're a hash value. And so the beauty of that is, we can actually say, yes, you may use my transactional data, but nobody will ever know it's me or it's mine. And I think people are a lot more comfortable with that. What we're seeing, particularly in the blockchain space, is this is the way that they will actually address using the data. And it's kind of, well, what do we do with the data? Let's talk about, well, how can we co-create? How can we say, hey, Ryan, if you let me use your transactional data, instead of you having to wade through, 50 categories of whatever, why don't I just give you, a short list of the things that I know that you're interested in, or your data is saying that you're interested in. But it doesn't say that Ryan's interested in it. It says this particular, hash value is interested in this. So they don't know it's you, but, and that'll be probably things like areas of interest, sort of the types of, authors, if they're books, for example, how much you're prepared to pay, how much often you buy, all this kind of stuff, which is all behavioural. And, so they give you a better experience. And we call them recommendation engines, and it's and I liken this. I love with Uber's a great example of that, where they used to have this. They had a centralized system where you get out the car and of course you can provide some feedback. Hey, this is what my ride was like, and of course the driver can say, well, this is what my rider was like. But the thing is that anybody could make that. And this is where Amazon came unstuck, of course. You go and buy a pencil and you got 500 reviews. They all look the same and they all sound the same. Yes, of course they probably are, and they're probably machine generated, some of them. But now with blockchain, if you're the rider in Uber, in that transaction, you are linked to that transaction. Can't be changed. I'm the driver. I'm linked to that transaction. There's only two people who can provide feedback on that particular ride. You as the rider, me as the driver. And what's really important about that is, if you're a great rider, I'd probably say, hey, Ryan was fantastic. Or it could go the other way. Oh, Ryan was dreadful, He sort of threw up a pizza in the back car and he left half a dozen empty tinnies in there as well for me to clean up later, So do I give him a good rating? I don't think so, And similarly, Ryan got in Marcus's Uber and, he's smoking big cigars and I don't smoke. I was choking on it and he had this horrible music going and every time I wanted to go somewhere, he'd go, hey, what, usual sort of stuff. So did Ryan give me a good review? No, I don't think so. But what happens is these become scores and it just is systems generated. So when I want to actually then, if you're standing on the corner and you want to, call your Uber, you'll have some specific characteristics. And you know what? If you give them the ability to get that information, they can actually look at the behaviours that you like. The only little cars that are going to show up on your app are the ones that will meet your requirements. There it is, so which tells you, but it's probably going to, it's going to thin out the good players from the bad players. So I think recommendation engines, people's data, sharing the data is really important. The technology can do this, autonomously, and it can do this anonymously as well, when we call these, pseudonymous transactions. So I think, where companies are actually, before like Facebook and others, I think they're looking at very different types of offers. And so is it any wonder they're moving into the metaverse, where people can actually define themselves and, be interesting to see what happens with the data and information there. But they're selling it. I think a lot of companies use it a lot themselves. They don't just sell off the data. I think people are very concerned these days in terms of buying data. As I mentioned before, hey, data is oil. Can I trust this data? If somebody else is just giving it to me or I'm buying it and I don't know its provenance, is it really valuable? Possibly, possibly not. So interesting times.
Very interesting times, and a great answer as well. Look, Marcus, we've been going for just over 40 odd minutes. Was there any closing thoughts you had for the viewers? And then also, where can they find out a little bit about yourself as well?
Well, the closing thoughts. I think, the thing I'd leave everybody with is do as much research. I call it going down rabbit holes. Get on to and search and understand what's going on with blockchain, as well as crypto. So, as I say, the blockchain and tokens, this is what drives crypto. But we need to really understand, I think I would hate to be thinking that some of our listeners here today, in 5 years' time, they'll be sitting there and go, oh, what just happened? And the world's gone past them. I said, you can't do that. This is a serious, serious revolution that's going on now. It's going on around you. And it's very likely things that you're doing is probably sitting on the blockchain anyway. But I think you really need to, to take note of it because it's pervading into everything that we do. So we really need to understand how it works and how it works for us. It is turning the world on its ear. So, I would say people, please don't ignore it and think, hey, it's all about sort of, anyway, take note of it. How do you get find me? I think you can always just Google Marcus Xavier. I think it's Marcus-Xavier, Xavier.io. You'll find me, and so that way you can always, and that has a bit of stuff in my profile. Other than that, you can go to Uber Academy, but Uber Academy is designed for teachers, but either way you can always make contact, I love talking to people who are interested in this space and doing really fascinating things. People are just so creative and so innovative, and once they understand, this is what I like, once they understand, all the sorts of things they can do, and it's endless, and if I go back, sorry to take your time here, Brian, but you go back, and I used to, when I was consulting, people say, oh, I can't come up with a new idea. Everybody's kind of thought of everything, you kind of get that pushback. Well, man, we're at a point in time, we can reinvent, we can change everything. There's nothing that you can't think of. So, but if you've got the tools, you know how it works, hey, happy days. It's a big reset, without a doubt.
Absolutely. Look, Marcus, don't go anywhere. We're just going to say goodbye to the viewers. I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for jumping on.
My pleasure, Ryan. Thanks for having me along.